"Don't touch my engine." The words cracked through the hangar louder than the roar of the turbine itself. Every conversation stopped. Every wrench froze in place. And standing beside a multi-million-dollar jet engine, with his grease-stained hands still resting lightly against the metal housing, Ethan Walker slowly looked up. No one in the building knew that the quiet single dad they were staring at had once carried a secret powerful enough to change every life in that room. The massive testing facility of Whitmore Aerospace stretched nearly 3 football fields long beneath bright industrial lights. The scent of jet fuel hung in the air. Tool carts rattled across polished concrete. Engineers moved between workstations carrying tablets filled with performance data. Above them all towered the company's newest achievement, the XA-900 experimental turbine engine, a project worth nearly $2 billion and the centerpiece of a defense contract that could transform the company forever. Claire Whitmore stood near the engine platform, perfectly composed in a tailored Navy business suit. At 35, she had already built a reputation as one of the toughest CEOs in American aerospace. Investors admired her. Competitors feared her. Employees respected her, though many kept their distance. She expected excellence and rarely tolerated disagreement. Especially today. The demonstration for government officials was only 48 hours away. Every detail mattered. Every risk had to be eliminated. So when she spotted a maintenance mechanic standing near her engine with his eyes closed and one hand resting against the casing, irritation flashed across her face immediately. "Is there a reason you're touching equipment you weren't assigned to?" she asked sharply. Several engineers glanced over. Ethan removed his hand and stepped back. "I heard something unusual," he answered calmly. "The vibration pattern feels off." A few people exchanged amused looks. One young engineer smirked openly. Claire folded her arms. "Feels off," she repeated. "That's your analysis?" Ethan nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." Laughter spread through a nearby group of technicians. Not cruel laughter. The kind people shared when they believed someone had said something ridiculous. Claire shook her head. "This engine was designed by some of the best aerospace engineers in the country." "I know," Ethan replied. "But something doesn't sound right." The smile disappeared from Claire's face. "You're a mechanic, Mr. Walker." "Yes, ma'am." "Then perhaps you should leave engineering decisions to engineers." More chuckles followed. Ethan simply nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He didn't mention the thousands of hours he had spent around military aircraft. He didn't mention the nights he still woke up remembering engines most people had never heard of. He just stepped away. Across the observation window overlooking the hangar floor stood a little girl holding a wooden model airplane. 9-year-old Lily Walker had been waiting for her father to finish his shift. She watched the exchange quietly. Even from a distance, she could tell what had happened. Children always knew. Ethan noticed her through the glass. He offered a small smile. Lily smiled back. That should have been the end of it. A mechanic made a suggestion. A CEO dismissed it. Another ordinary day inside a giant aerospace company. But as Ethan turned away from the engine, a faint metallic tremor echoed deep within the turbine. Barely noticeable. Barely audible. Almost everyone missed it. Almost everyone except Ethan Walker. And the look that crossed his face lasted only a second before disappearing completely. The next morning began long before sunrise. Claire Whitmore stood alone inside the executive conference room on the top floor of Whitmore Aerospace, staring through 40 feet of glass overlooking the sprawling facility below. The hangars glowed beneath rows of security lights. Fuel trucks moved slowly across the tarmac. Engineers were already arriving. In less than 48 hours, representatives from the Department of Defense would walk through those doors to witness the most important demonstration in company history. The XA-900 turbine program had consumed nearly 6 years of research, thousands of test hours, and hundreds of millions of dollars beyond the original budget. If the demonstration succeeded, Whitmore Aerospace would secure a contract large enough to reshape the company for decades. If it failed, competitors would move in immediately. Claire understood pressure. She had lived with it her entire life. A framed photograph rested on the corner of her desk. In it, a smiling Air Force pilot stood beside a fighter jet beneath a bright western sky. Her father, Colonel Daniel Whitmore. Even after all these years, she still found herself looking at that photograph whenever difficult decisions appeared. Her father had taught her discipline, excellence, Responsibility. He had also taught her never to trust luck when preparation could do the job instead. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. Grant Mercer entered carrying a tablet filled with performance reports. Morning. Claire nodded. Tell me something good. Grant offered a confident smile. All system checks are green. Engineering signed off on every subsystem overnight. Claire accepted the tablet and reviewed the data. Temperatures, fuel flow, vibration metrics, efficiency projections. Everything appeared perfect. Yet something about the report bothered her. Not enough to identify, just enough to linger. Any concerns for maintenance? She asked. Grant laughed lightly. You mean your mechanic? Claire glanced up. Ethan Walker. Yes. Grant shook his head dismissively. Nothing worth discussing. He claimed he heard a vibration issue. No data supports it. Claire remained silent. The sensors are clean, Grant continued. The analysis team agrees. The engine is performing exactly as designed. She nodded slowly. Logic supported Grant. Data supported Grant. Yet she remembered the strange confidence in Ethan's voice. Not arrogance. Not stubbornness. Certainty. The kind that came from experience. She pushed the thought aside. Focus on the demonstration, she said. I do not want surprises. You will not get any. Down below, the morning shift was beginning. Ethan arrived before 6 o'clock as usual. The hangar felt colder than normal. The smell of fuel mixed with machine oil drifted through the air. Workers moved between stations while forklifts carried equipment toward the testing platform. Ethan walked quietly across the floor, carrying his tool bag. He did not seek attention. He rarely did. As he passed beneath the suspended engine housing, he slowed briefly. His eyes moved across the metal surface. Then he stopped completely. Somewhere deep inside the machinery, hidden behind layers of titanium and composite shielding, he thought he heard it again. Faint, irregular, almost impossible to notice. A tiny metallic rhythm that did not belong. 3 beats. A pause. Then another vibration. Ethan frowned. Around him, nobody reacted. Nobody else seemed to hear it. Above the noise of the facility, above the movement of hundreds of employees preparing for a historic day, the sound vanished almost immediately. But this time, a feeling settled heavily in his chest. Because he had heard that exact rhythm once before many years ago. And the last time he heard it, an entire flight program had nearly been lost. The rest of the morning passed beneath a growing weight that Ethan could not shake. He completed inspections, signed maintenance logs, and repaired a faulty hydraulic panel on a support vehicle, yet his thoughts kept returning to the same sound. By noon, the hangar buzzed with even greater urgency. Government representatives were scheduled to arrive the following day. Every department was operating at full speed. Engineers moved between workstations carrying stacks of reports. Technicians calibrated sensors. Supervisors reviewed safety procedures. Everyone seemed focused on the future. Everyone except Ethan. Shortly after lunch, he returned to the testing platform where the XA-900 remained mounted beneath a network of cables and diagnostic equipment. The engine was inactive now. Quiet. Motionless. But as he stood beneath it, he noticed something unusual. A maintenance access panel near the rear housing showed faint discoloration around one fastening point. Most people would never have seen it. Ethan did. He stepped closer. His fingers traced the edge of the panel. Heat stress. Minor. Barely visible. Yet it matched the location where the vibration seemed strongest. He pulled a small flashlight from his tool bag and examined the area. More carefully. Looking for buried treasure? The voice came from behind him. Ethan turned. Grant Mercer approached with 2 engineers following close behind. Their expressions already carried amusement. Ethan lowered the flashlight. I think there may be a resonance issue near the rear assembly. One engineer laughed quietly. Grant folded his arms. Still on that. Ethan nodded. I would like permission to run an additional inspection. Based on what? Grant asked. A feeling. Ethan remained calm. Based on experience. Grant smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind people used when they believed they had already won an argument. The engine has passed every test. Not every test, Ethan replied. Not the one that matters tomorrow. The smile disappeared. For a moment, the surrounding noise seemed to fade. One engineer glanced between them nervously. Grant took a step closer. You know what your problem is, Walker? Ethan said nothing. You think fixing equipment makes you an engineer. No, then what exactly do you think you are? Ethan met his gaze steadily. Someone trying to prevent a mistake. The words hung in the air. Grant shook his head and laughed. You are a maintenance mechanic. He pointed toward the far side of the hangar where service carts were lined in neat rows. Your job is to fix what breaks after engineers build it. That is the difference between us. Several nearby employees pretended not to listen while listening very carefully. Ethan did not react. Grant seemed almost disappointed by that. Go back to your work, he said. Leave the design decisions to people who understand jet engines. Ethan looked once more at the housing panel. Then he quietly placed the flashlight back into his bag. I understand this engine better than you think. Grant smirked. Sure you do. Ethan walked away without another word. Yet as he crossed the hangar floor, he felt something he had not felt in years. Not anger. Not humiliation. Concern. Deep concern. Because the vibration was growing easier to hear. And somewhere inside that engine, hidden beneath layers of metal and technology, a problem was getting worse. By late afternoon, the atmosphere inside Whitmore Aerospace had shifted from routine precision to something closer to controlled tension. Even people who did not understand engines could feel it. The XA-900 sat in the testing bay like a sleeping giant surrounded by cables, scaffolding, and diagnostic screens filled with green status indicators that looked reassuring but somehow felt fragile. Claire Whitmore stood in the central control booth watching everything through reinforced glass. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable, but her eyes never left the engine. Grant Mercer stood slightly behind her, speaking in a low, confident voice while pointing at data streams on a tablet. As you can see, everything is stable. No anomalies. No irregularities. The system is performing exactly as designed. Claire nodded slowly, though her attention was not fully on him. Something about Ethan Walker's earlier comment lingered at the edge of her thoughts like a noise she could not identify. She had built her entire career on trusting data over instinct. Yet instinct had a way of resurfacing when pressure increased. Down on the hangar floor, Ethan continued his routine work as if nothing had changed. He checked a hydraulic connection on a service platform, tightened a valve on a maintenance cart, and updated a log entry on a handheld device. To anyone watching, he looked ordinary, invisible even. But every few minutes, his gaze drifted back toward the engine. He was counting something in his head, not numbers, timing. The rhythm he had heard was no longer faint. It was becoming consistent, predictable, and that was what worried him the most. A young technician approached him cautiously. Walker, Mr. Mercer said you were causing concern earlier. Ethan did not look up. I am not causing concern. Then what are you doing? Ethan paused for a moment before answering. Trying to understand what I am hearing. The technician frowned. We are running diagnostics constantly. Everything is within tolerance. Ethan finally looked at him. Tolerance does not always mean safety. The technician hesitated, unsure how to respond, then walked away. Near the upper platform, Claire noticed the exchange. She leaned slightly toward Grant. What was that about? Grant shrugged. Nothing. He is overthinking. Probably wants attention. Claire did not respond immediately. Instead, she watched Ethan move slowly across the floor until he stopped near a side console. He placed his hand lightly on the railing, not touching the engine this time, just observing. There was something steady about him. Not confident in a loud way, just certain. That certainty unsettled her more than she expected. Suddenly, a soft alert chimed from one of the monitoring stations. A technician looked up. We are seeing a minor fluctuation in the rear turbine pressure curve. Grant stepped forward quickly. That is within acceptable variance. Another alert followed. Then another. The screens began updating faster. Still green. Still technically stable. But no longer perfectly smooth. Claire straightened. Explain that, she said. Grant typed rapidly. It is a sensor lag. Possibly calibration drift. Ethan's voice came from below the platform, calm but firm. It is not calibration drift. The entire hangar seemed to quiet slightly at his words. Claire looked down through the glass. What did you say? Ethan stepped closer to the control boundary line. The timing sequence is shifting. Slightly, but consistently. Grant scoffed. That is impossible. Ethan pointed toward a secondary diagnostic screen. Check the harmonic overlay on channel 4. A technician hesitated, then opened the file. Silence followed. Claire watched the data carefully. The pattern was subtle, almost invisible, but once seen, it was impossible to ignore. A deviation in rhythm, not large enough to trigger alarms, but structured enough to suggest a deeper mechanical imbalance. Claire's expression changed for the first time. Not fear. Not panic. Focus. She turned to Grant. Why was this not flagged? Grant hesitated. Because it is not significant. Ethan shook his head slightly. It is early-stage resonance drift. The word resonance changed the air in the room. Every engineer understood its implications, even if they did not want to admit it. Claire stepped forward to the edge of the platform. Her voice lowered. How long until it becomes significant? Ethan looked up at her. For the first time, there was no distance in his expression. Only certainty. Not long. The emergency alert did not arrive as a loud siren or dramatic announcement. It came instead as a subtle shift in the control room atmosphere, like the air itself had become heavier. One of the technicians froze mid-typing. Another leaned closer to his monitor. A third whispered something under his breath that no one responded to. On the main diagnostic wall, the XA-900 data stream flickered once, then stabilized, then flickered again with a pattern that no longer matched normal operational behavior. Claire Whitmore stepped forward immediately. "Talk to me," she said sharply. The head systems engineer adjusted his headset. "We are seeing accelerated harmonic deviation in the rear compression sequence." Grant Mercer moved quickly to the console. "That is impossible. The system was green less than 20 minutes ago." Ethan Walker was already walking toward the access stairway without waiting for permission. Claire noticed him immediately. "Where are you going?" she asked. Ethan did not stop. "To confirm something." Grant pointed at him. "Nobody authorized access to the platform during live monitoring." Ethan finally turned slightly. His voice remained calm. "Then authorize it now or accept the risk." A brief silence followed. Claire looked between Grant and Ethan. The data on the screen updated again. The rhythm was no longer subtle. It was becoming structured, predictable in the wrong way. She made a decision. "Let him through." Grant frowned. "Claire, that is not protocol." "I said let him through." Ethan moved quickly up the service stairs leading to the lower maintenance ring beneath the engine platform. As he approached the structure, the sound became clearer. Not loud. Not chaotic. Controlled. Too controlled. That was what troubled him. He stopped beneath the rear housing section and closed his eyes for a brief moment, listening. Around him, technicians stood back, watching silently. Claire appeared above him on the upper platform, looking down through reinforced glass panels. "What are you hearing?" she asked. Ethan opened his eyes. "A repeating pressure cycle that does not belong to this configuration." Grant spoke through the communication system. "That is a subjective interpretation." Ethan shook his head slightly. "It is mechanical memory." Claire narrowed her eyes. "Explain that." Ethan placed his hand near a diagnostic access port without opening it. When a system begins to fail in a structured way, it repeats the pattern of stress that created the imbalance. This is not random fluctuation. It is a cycle forming under load. The engineers exchanged uneasy glances. Claire looked at the data again. The pattern was still within safety margin thresholds. But now it was undeniably patterned. She turned to Grant. "Why did the system not detect this?" Grant hesitated for the first time. "Because it should not exist." Ethan stepped back from the engine. "It exists." The hangar lights flickered slightly as the system compensated for load redistribution. Every technician looked up instinctively. Claire's voice tightened. "How long until this becomes critical?" Ethan did not hesitate. "Hours if load increases. Days if it stabilizes. But it will not correct itself." A silence spread across the entire hangar floor. Even the background machinery noise seemed distant. Claire studied Ethan carefully now, no longer as a maintenance worker, but as something she had not yet labeled. "You are certain?" she asked. Ethan met her gaze directly. "Yes." For the first time since the demonstration began, Claire did not respond immediately. She looked at the engine, then at the data, then back at Ethan. Something about the certainty in his voice cut through everything else she had built her career on trusting. Finally, she spoke. "Shut down non-essential systems on my authority. I want a full diagnostic override initiated immediately." Grant reacted instantly. "That will delay the entire schedule." Claire did not look at him. "I did not ask about the schedule." She turned slightly toward Ethan. "If you are wrong, this costs us everything." Ethan nodded once. "If I am wrong, nothing happens. If I am right, waiting costs more." The words hung in the air longer than anyone expected. Slowly, system protocols began to shift. Engineers moved with urgency. Commands were entered. Safety procedures were initiated. And as the XA-900 entered diagnostic lockdown mode, the strange rhythm inside the engine continued, steady and unchanged, as if it had been waiting for someone to finally listen. The XA-900 hangar had entered a state of controlled silence. Not peace, not calm, but the kind of silence that forms when every person in the room understands that something important is happening and no one is willing to interrupt it. The diagnostic lockdown protocols had reduced engine activity to a minimal baseline, yet the strange rhythm Ethan Walker had identified did not disappear. It remained embedded in the data like a heartbeat that refused to stop. Claire Whitmore stood in the elevated control booth with her arms lowered now, no longer crossed. Her focus was absolute. Every assumption she had held about the system was being reevaluated in real time. Grant Mercer stood beside her, visibly less certain than before, scrolling through layered diagnostic outputs that no longer aligned with his earlier confidence. "We are not seeing structural failure," one engineer reported. "But we are also not seeing full stability," another added. That contradiction hung in the air like an unanswered question. Ethan remained on the lower maintenance platform. He had not moved in several minutes. His eyes were closed again, not in concentration alone, but in recognition. He was listening to something beneath the machine, something most people would have dismissed as background noise. Claire's voice came through the intercom. "Ethan, explain what you are hearing in simple terms." He opened his eyes. "It is not one problem. It is a sequence of small imbalances repeating in a pattern." Grant interjected immediately. "That is not supported by sensor logs." Ethan looked upward toward the control booth. "Your sensors are measuring output, not memory." A technician frowned. "Memory of what?" Ethan paused before answering. "Stress history." The hangar fell quiet again. Claire stepped closer to the glass. "You are saying the engine is repeating previous stress conditions internally?" Ethan nodded once. "Yes, that is why the vibration feels familiar. It is not random. It is a loop forming under pressure cycles." Grant shook his head. "That is not possible in a new turbine system." Ethan responded calmly. "It is possible when design tolerances ignore resonance feedback across layered components." The engineers exchanged uneasy looks. Claire turned to the data again. The pattern was still subtle but undeniable once pointed out. A cycle repeating every few seconds with slight amplification. Not catastrophic yet, but evolving. Claire made a decision. "Begin controlled load reduction on auxiliary systems." Grant protested. "That will interrupt the demonstration sequence entirely." Claire did not look at him. "I am not interested in a demonstration that fails in front of government officials tomorrow." The command was executed immediately. Across the hangar, systems adjusted. Energy distribution shifted. Cooling arrays engaged at higher capacity. Yet even as the load decreased, the pattern did not disappear. Instead, it became clearer. Ethan's expression tightened slightly. "It is stabilizing into a stronger loop," he said. Claire looked at him sharply. "Explain that." Ethan stepped forward beneath the engine platform. "When a system compensates for imbalance without addressing the source, it can reinforce the cycle instead of breaking it." Grant pointed at him from above. "So what are you suggesting exactly?" Ethan looked up. "We isolate the rear compression module and reset its harmonic calibration manually." Engineers immediately reacted with concern. "That requires full shutdown," one said. "That is not part of scheduled procedure," another added. Claire raised a hand, stopping the debate. She looked directly at Ethan. "If we do this, we risk missing the demonstration window." Ethan replied without hesitation. "If you do not, you risk the engine failing under full load." The weight of that statement settled across the room. Claire turned toward the engineers, then back toward the system display. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she gave a quiet order. "Prepare for manual recalibration." Grant's face tightened. "Claire, this is going too far based on one mechanic's interpretation." She finally looked at him. "Then prove him wrong." Grant hesitated. For the first time, he had no immediate answer. Below them, Ethan began preparing access tools. The hangar lighting shifted slightly as systems transitioned into deeper maintenance mode. The XA-900 stood silent, but no longer neutral. It was now a machine being carefully held back from its own hidden imbalance. And as Ethan positioned himself at the access point, he understood something clearly. This was no longer about proving a point. It was about stopping a pattern before it reached the point of no return. The decision was made, but it did not bring calm. It brought motion. Controlled, precise, and immediate motion. Within seconds of Claire Whitmore's authorization, the XA-900 hangar transformed into a coordinated engineering response environment. Technicians moved with purpose across elevated platforms. Safety protocols activated in sequence. Auxiliary systems were shut down in carefully planned stages. Warning indicators shifted from operational green to maintenance amber. The massive turbine remained suspended in its mounting frame like a silent monument, but everything around it now served a single goal: manual harmonic recalibration. Ethan Walker stood at the primary rear access point beneath the engine housing. He checked each tool twice without rushing, not from anxiety, but from discipline. Around him, two senior technicians monitored safety thresholds while one engineer managed system isolation controls. Above him in the control booth, Claire Whitmore observed every movement closely. Grant Mercer stood beside her, arms rigid, expression tight, no longer confident, but still unwilling to concede uncertainty. All non-essential systems are now isolated, a technician reported. We are entering manual intervention phase. Claire responded without looking away from Ethan. Proceed carefully. Ethan placed one hand on the access panel. I will need full silence on external communications during recalibration, he said. Grant immediately objected. That is not standard protocol. Ethan looked up briefly. Noise interference can affect harmonic synchronization. During reset, Claire paused, then nodded once. Approved. The communication channel switched to internal-only monitoring. The hangar noise seemed to soften, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Ethan opened the panel slowly. Inside, layers of precision-engineered components were revealed, arranged in tightly integrated alignment. He did not rush. His eyes tracked the configuration as though reading something familiar rather than complex. A technician leaned toward another and whispered, "How does he know where to look?" The question went unanswered. Ethan connected a diagnostic interface cable and initiated a low-level scan. A soft tone confirmed system access. On the main display above, harmonic patterns expanded into view. The looping structure was now clearly visible. Claire studied the screen carefully. Even without engineering expertise, she could see the repetition. A wave pattern folding into itself. It is growing stronger, she said quietly. Ethan responded without looking away from the interface. It is reinforcing because it has not been reset since initial calibration drift began. Grant crossed his arms. We are still assuming the drift started when? Ethan paused. Approximately 12 hours ago during early test ignition. A technician checked logs quickly. That aligns with initial low-level fluctuation reports. Claire's attention sharpened. Why did no one escalate it then? Silence followed. No one had a satisfactory answer. Ethan began adjusting internal calibration nodes through the interface. Each adjustment required careful synchronization. One incorrect alignment could amplify the pattern instead of neutralizing it. The hangar lights dimmed slightly as systems compensated for shifting internal load distribution. A faint vibration passed through the platform floor. Subtle, not dangerous, but noticeable. Claire straightened. Is that normal? Ethan answered immediately. Yes, that is the system responding to recalibration resistance. Grant looked at the readings again. Resistance? Ethan nodded. The loop is structured enough to counter adjustment attempts. It is not passive. That statement changed the atmosphere. Instantly, one engineer stepped back slightly from the console. Claire's voice became more controlled. Are you saying the system is adapting? Ethan hesitated for the first time. Yes. A brief silence followed. Then Grant spoke quietly. That is not in the design specifications. Ethan continued working. It is not in any specifications. That is why it was not detected earlier. Claire stepped closer to the glass barrier, separating her from the lower platform. Can you still reset it? Ethan focused on the interface. Yes, but only if the core harmonic loop is interrupted at the source point. He adjusted one final parameter and paused. And that requires full synchronization between manual override and system memory cycle. A technician frowned. System memory cycle? Ethan looked up. The pattern is being stored temporarily in operational feedback loops. That is why it repeats. Claire absorbed the information slowly. Then we interrupt the memory cycle. Ethan nodded once. Exactly. Grant exhaled sharply. If this fails, we lose the entire engine. Ethan responded calmly. If this continues, you will lose it anyway. The words settled heavily. Claire studied Ethan for a long moment. Then she gave a quiet instruction. Proceed. Ethan placed both hands on the control interface. Around him, the engine remained suspended in silence. And for the first time since the anomaly began, the entire system prepared for a reset that would determine whether the hidden rhythm inside the machine could finally be broken or whether it would continue to grow unchecked beneath layers of precision engineering. The XA-900 hangar was no longer a place of observation. It had become a place of execution. Every system was now synchronized around a single objective, breaking the harmonic memory cycle before it reached a self-reinforcing threshold. Ethan Walker stood perfectly still for a brief moment after initiating the reset sequence. His hands remained on the interface controls, eyes locked on the shifting wave pattern across the diagnostic display. Around him, engineers held their positions in tense silence. Above, in the control booth, Claire Whitmore leaned forward slightly. Her entire focus narrowed to the live data feed. Grant Mercer stood beside her, jaw tight, watching as the system entered its most critical phase. Reset sequence initiated, a technician announced. The words were followed by a subtle shift in the engine's behavior. The rhythmic cycle that had defined the anomaly began to distort. Not collapse, not vanish. Distort. The harmonic loop resisted. Ethan's voice came through the internal channel, calm but firm. It is reacting to the interruption. Maintain stabilization on secondary calibration nodes. Engineers moved quickly, adjusting parameters in real time. The XA-900 emitted a low structural hum as internal systems redistributed pressure loads. The vibration pattern on the main screen fractured briefly into irregular segments. Claire's eyes tracked every change. Is it breaking? She asked. Ethan answered immediately. Not yet. It is resisting correction. Grant stepped closer to the console. How does a system resist recalibration? Ethan did not look up. By attempting to preserve its last stable state. Another technician spoke quickly. We are seeing increased feedback recursion in Channel 6. Ethan responded without hesitation. Compensate by offsetting phase alignment by 0.03 microseconds. The engineer executed the adjustment. The display shifted again. The loop pattern wavered, then tightened. A brief moment of uncertainty passed through the hangar. Claire's expression changed. It is adapting faster than before. Ethan nodded once. It is trying to protect itself. Grant frowned. A machine does not protect itself. Ethan finally looked upward. This one does. The words landed heavily in the room. No one responded immediately. Then the system alarm softened. Not louder. Not sharper. Softer. As if the engine were lowering its own resistance threshold. A technician reacted instantly. We are approaching synchronization collapse point. Ethan increased his focus. Final phase alignment required now. Claire made a quick decision. Proceed with full override authorization. Grant turned sharply toward her. Claire, that bypasses all final safety interlocks. She did not hesitate. We do not have time for caution that does not work. Ethan initiated the final sequence. Across the engine, internal feedback loops reached peak tension. The harmonic cycle expanded rapidly on the display, then began to fold inward. For a moment, nothing changed. Then the pattern broke. Not explosively, not dramatically, but completely. The rhythmic loop that had dominated the system for hours collapsed into neutral data flow. A quiet notification appeared across every screen in the hangar. Stabilization achieved. For several seconds, no one spoke. The XA-900 engine remained suspended in its housing, now running at controlled idle parameters. The strange vibration was gone. Ethan slowly removed his hands from the interface. Only then did he exhale. Claire stared at the data, verifying every readout twice. Then she turned her attention toward Ethan. Grant remained silent beside her, his earlier confidence gone entirely. A technician finally broke the silence. System is fully stabilized. Another confirmed. All harmonic deviations have returned to nominal range. Claire stepped closer to the glass, looking down at Ethan directly. You were right, she said quietly. Ethan did not respond immediately. He simply nodded once. Above him, The massive engine continued running smoothly for the first time since the anomaly had begun. The danger had not been visible in any dramatic form. It had been hidden in repetition, in structure, in a rhythm that no one else had recognized. But one person had listened long enough to hear it. And because of that, a system worth billions of dollars had been saved not by power, but by attention. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.